What the truck?
You are listening to What the Truck. Welcome to What the Truck. It's Friday. That means it is August 8th for you, dear listener. We've made it. We've done it. It's the end of the week. Those of you who are driving should be nearing that glorified 34-hour reset. And I hope that the parking may find you well and that the bathrooms are free. It's like an Irish trucker's blessing, folks. But we're going to have a wonderful show today. Coming up, we're going to have some news and headlines. Our guests for today are going to be Kevin Hill, owner of Brush Pass Research, going to be talking about some brokerage trends. That's right, dear listener. It's not only trucking companies that have been going out of business, but the freight brokerages who service them have been going through dire straits. Kind of like Charles Dickens, except that instead of being middle class in Victorian England, we're all slumming it up, making phone calls, and wondering why we lost $50 on that crappy grocery load. And then later on in the second half, we're going to be welcoming on Mike Baudendistel. He's the head of Intermodal Solutions at Sonar. We're going to be diving into what it means for the intermodal carriers now that Norfolk Southern and Union Pacific may be tied together in holy mergers and acquisitions matrimony. Don't worry though, CSX may also be waiting in the wings. Everybody is hooking up like a middle schooler at the prom or a dance, and who's going to get left out? We're going to find out in this show today. But first, we want to give a special thanks to our sponsor, Verizon Business. Check them out. It's not Verizon, it's Verizon Business. Let's dive into some of our first articles of the day. The first one was written by yours truly. That's right, it's me, CoLab, co.lab. They're calling for startups and its Sustainable Mobility Accelerator program. For those of you who don't know, it's called the Company Lab. They're looking for their next cohort of companies to be part of this program. It runs for 6 weeks, during which participants are working in Chattanooga, focusing on acquisition strategies and pilot implementations. While relocating permanently to Chattanooga is not required, several of the past participants have established operations in the city after completing the program. And so it's part of the CoLab's 16-year-long history of supporting entrepreneurship. Who are they looking for? Well, in this latest round, we're looking for startups with traction. That means post-revenue or in-market pilots. So if you have a fancy idea, folks, unfortunately, that's not enough. You have to have it. It has to be made. You have to be having an easy way to either deploy it or you're nearly ready to deploy it. We're looking at connected and autonomous vehicles, supply chain logistics and freight tech, smart infrastructure and intelligent traffic systems, EV charging, battery tech, and grid optimization, AI and Internet of Things for urban mobility and infrastructure, micro mobility and mobility as a service, or MaaS. Just wait, MaaS. That's right, folks. I'm not going to church or their mass. I'm going to go check out my mobility as a service. And then finally, mobility data and predictive analytics. So if any of you folks have it, check it out. If you haven't noticed, Chattanooga is known as the Silicon Valley of freight. It's a moniker given by Steve Case. He has the Revolution founder and an investor in FreightWaves. That's right, we helped make it happen. Thank you so much, Steve Case. I got to meet him once. He's a real cool guy. He didn't know who I was, but I know who he was. Great book as well. Check him out. And then secondly, here's some more fun Chattanooga facts before I dive into my next story. According to a study by Cambridge Systematics, the Freight Alley, or this area of Chattanooga, it has around 80% of all U.S. freight travels through Chattanooga, due in part to the convergence of three interstates, I-75, I-24, and I-59. So if you wonder why traffic is so bad around Chattanooga, it's a twofer. We just happen to be at that little bit of a nexus between a bunch of locations where the interstates are bisecting. So hey drivers, maybe you all also get to check out the scenic city. While you're at it, go up the big long hill, going up the Missionary Ridge, get stuck in traffic, go down to 30 miles per hour, and curse the fact that your governor is only at 65. All right, let's move on to the next story here. This one is talking about company earnings. FreightWaves' John Kingston is writing that for the folks at RXO, LTL is proving to be a big growth engine. The company hopes that it will get around half of its business, big double-digit gains in the first quarter. So it looks to me as if, let's look real quick here, digging through on a live show. They're expanding into LTL because it looks like it's a growth strategy. LTL activities were up 32% of all brokerage volume in Q2. That is up 1,000 basis points from a year ago, and it's the highest level in RXO's history. So continue to see how that works because it looks like once the customers are familiar with RXO and its online platform RXO Connect, they see it as the next logical step to move their LTL business. This is fascinating because when you think about it, normally trucking decides to go into LTL, but seeing that freight brokerages are starting to dip into that, it's going to be something worth watching. Speaking of watching, unfortunately, the U.S. Postal Service's loss has widened to $3.1 billion as inflation bites. The new Postmaster General Steiner endorses their predecessor's turnaround plan as mail parcel volumes continue to shrink. Unfortunately, their adjusted operating loss had widened by $522 million to $1.6 billion for the fiscal year, third quarter, as expensive nearly increased over 3%. So, whenever we talk about fiscal years and quarters, here's a fun factoid, listeners. They don't all start in Q1. Some companies start their fiscal year in Q3, others in Q2. So, whenever you see articles like that, no, it is not a typo. It just happens to be when some bean counter decided to make it so. There was a highlight, though. There was a 39.6% or nearly 40% growth in volume for the new Ground Advantage Budget project, which replaced its first class packages services in 2023 and offers 2 to 5 day service standards for packages up to 70 pounds. That Ground Advantage revenue increased 31% to $4.1 billion. So there's some good, there's some bad. But at the end of the day, the USPS is currently in a 10-year modernization and cost reduction strategy that was created by the predecessor, Louis DeJoy. And so hopefully the folks at the USPS get it turned around, delivering our packages while turning a profit for us taxpayers. And then when we're looking here at other news, trade experts are predicting a 200% surge in tariff fraud crackdowns. This comes as importer tariff evasion is predicted to be a top revenue generator. And so, a trade analyst, his name is Rennie Alston, had warned importers that regulators are going to be doubling down on ensuring that the growing list of tariffs imposed by the Trump administration are properly paid. And so it looks to me like not only are folks going to try and dodge the tariffs, they're also going to be caught more, making us more money while also causing more heartache. So that's a little bit of a wrap for our news today. Of course, if you have any other stuff you want to read, check us out, freightwaves.com. Go to the website. I write stuff, other people write stuff, wonderful stuff. Speaking of stuff, let's welcome on our first guest, the great Kevin Hill, owner of Brush Pass Research. Kevin, absolute pleasure to have you on the show. You have been busy lately. I stalked your LinkedIn, so I should know. How have you been, man?
I think good. It's good to talk to you, Thomas. It's been a while, so it's always good to talk to you. Good to see you behind the desk there, and hope everything's going well.
It looks great. See, I got a little bit of a nicer background. The purple really ties into my pale complexion. So, I feel like this is moving up. Loaded and Rolling has a darker shade of purple. So I'm gonna have a word with the guys in the back. But let's talk about some interesting stuff. You have some data here, active shipper data from CarrierSource. This was posted on your LinkedIn page, and this is fascinating. It's a shipper regional search trends heat map. Tell us a little bit about what goes into this, and then we'll dive into some of the details for your most recent update.
So I own First Pass Research, but I'm now head of sales over at CarrierSource, and what goes into this is very exciting, right? So basically, it's a CarrierSource is a platform where shippers come in and search for carriers, right? It's all public online, it's free. So this is real time information of shippers, verified shippers, searching for carriers and capacity in certain regions and locations. We can do that by your origin, your destination, truck type, specializations, all of that good stuff. So it's real time data that is or intent signals. But in aggregate, they make great maps.
I really like the map, and when we're looking at this map, it's fascinating because you'll see data charts on where carriers are at. So we've seen a few of them where brokerages and carriers are located. Very rarely in shippers, I see two locations that stick out. Then we'll dive into the regional ones. Looking in the PNW next to Oregon, I wonder if that's the big old like lumber area right on the coast or something. That one is fascinating. And then the final one there near Amarillo in Texas, there's like a bunch of flower places and like milling. I always wondered if that's kind of like correlates to if they're looking for capacity. We're finding these clusters.
It does, and very good eye on to the Pacific Northwest. We have lumber companies and people buying lumber that come in searching for carriers and capacity in those areas. And then out in West Texas, you do have those mills. You also have a lot of oil field type of moves coming all the way up to Amarillo, and people searching for carriers for those West Texas oil fields.
And one of the things was port adjacent and heavy export zones. When we're looking at those regional highlights, we had the PNW, Southern Cal were dominating. Talk a little bit about that because it looks like when we say the impacts of tariffs, you actually have the data to show that not only are the shippers and the importers concerned, but there's actually activity and byproducts. So it's like one thing to say, "Hey, I'm hearing about it." It's another to say, "Holy cow, there's a heat map. It is picking up."
It's picking up, right? And we're seeing a lot of port searches. So the port markets have been hot and heavy for the last 2 or 3 months, kind of volatile, but still hot and heavy. And the shipper search activity that we're seeing is interesting to kind of put together. It's a young data set, but trying to figure out how much of it is needs that or needed right now, right? That spot or urgent type of shipments or pre-planning. So whether that shows that those initial searches translate into freight volumes in 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 8 weeks. I think it runs the gamut of that. But you're seeing a lot of activity, a lot of decision making when it comes to imports coming in. And whether that's front running, whether those are going to get loaded onto to trucks and move to the interior parts of the country immediately or right now, if there's urgency in that, I think that's what everyone's trying to figure out.
And let's dive into the Midwest a little bit. I know football season is coming up, so no Ohio State fans is not because you think your team is special or that you're the Ohio State, but the state of Ohio in particular, like the Ohio Valley, it looks like they are ramping up. When we're looking at that, yeah, check out the map right there. Midwest is getting a little bit active. Talk about some of the details on that. What are you seeing right now, and what do the tea leaves tell us?
Well, I think what you're seeing in the Midwest is, Midwest is always active, but you have a lot of the heavy industrial industries, the steel industries. We see a lot of people searching coming out of steel plants and going to different construction projects. A lot of times that could be South Florida, it could be Texas, it could be into Mexico. So we see a lot of traffic between the Midwest on flatbeds and hauling those steels and those coils, those beams coming down to Laredo. In and out of Mexico, so still seeing that pretty active, and then you have the population centers with the distribution centers that are in Ohio, and you see a lot of drive-in and reefer freight activity in those searches.
And before we dive into brokerage authorities, I wanted to pick your brain on the impacts of produce season as well. I was curious in previous data sets, did we ever see any kind of activity? Where we're at for that? I'm kind of produce adjacent, but in the dry van, it's like, if it gets too hot, you can't really put your cabbage in it. It kind of wilts. Like I've hauled apples before and that turned out really bad. So talk a little bit about that. Are there any other kind of seasonality trends that over the course of not only this week and previous weeks that you've observed?
Part of the seasonal trends, right? So it's a young data set, so still trying to put all that together. So you can see some seasonal trends. What you really see in the data, if you put up the index, and I don't know if you have that handy, but you can see a huge drop in search activity coming into the April 2nd reciprocal tariffs, right? That initial, and then I'm pausing. You saw it shot shoot back up again. Now, coming into the 1st of August, you saw a massive decline over a couple weeks of shipper activity coming into that. And I think that it's not seasonal, but it shows uncertainty in the market. When there's uncertainty in the market, you see activity crawl to a halt. And we saw a recovery this past week once we made it through the August 1st. So we'll see what the new tariff announcements and the like will show for the week we're in right now. We publish it every Tuesday morning, so we'll see if we bounce back up from. We had 2 consecutive weeks of 20% drops, so it massively dropped off. With the same amount of traffic, the same amount of shippers visiting the site, they're just conducting fewer searches. So we'll see if we continue to rebound coming into next week.
And that kind of ties into our next topic as well, which is the amount of brokerage authorities. And this is courtesy of the folks at Carrier Details and Brush Pass Research. A lot of the talk has been of the exodus of capacity in the trucking space, but you've done an amazing job continuing to compile data on how this is impacting freight brokerages. First, tell us a little bit of the background, and then we're going to dive into what's going on in the 3PL space.
So the background is you had this huge surge of newly minted fresh MC numbers during the pandemic, right? I think we started with the pandemic with roughly about 20,000 active freight brokerages. There were 25,000 new freight brokerages created in a short 2-year span, and it coincides with the pandemic. So once the market took a downturn after that bull market that we saw, you would expect a mass exodus of MC numbers leaving the industry, and that's what we've seen over the last couple of years. It seems to have flattened out. Over the last 3 months, we've had, really double-digit decreases. Really small double-digit. This last month in July, we saw negative on net, a negative drop in active authorities of 27. And over the last 3 months, the combined is about 55. So we're seeing a flattening out of this. Hopefully, that is a market recovery. KCH over in Chattanooga, Bo King and Henry Byers did some great analysis this month showing that carrier growth or MC numbers on the carrier side and brokerages kind of decoupled. They were in a pretty tight correlation historically, but they've kind of decoupled as well. So it's very interesting research that they're doing over there.
And I like that. I like the fact also that your data goes all the way out since 2017 because it just really illustrates the huge impact COVID had. Because you'd think in a normal economy, regardless of the freight cycle, there's always more demand. So it makes sense we see more capacity kind of meet the demand. GDP goes up 2%. I'm going to need more stuff to haul. But looking
Mhm.
at that far right side of the image, and like you said, these past 3 months are little bitty bars compared to the deep losses
Yeah.
in terms of net losses. Do you think, looking ahead, do you have any freight crystal ball? Do you think it'll take a little bit of time before that line finally reaches that baseline by like maybe the end of the year? Or what are some of the thoughts based on conversations as well? Or is it kind of still too early to tell?
It's kind of too early to tell, but I would say that we might touch the black line might touch that bar by the end of the year. If not, maybe the first quarter of next year, if everything kind of goes smoothly from here on out. It is interesting, it's going back to 2017. If you talk about the average annual increase or the CAGR of new MC numbers for freight brokerages, and if you carried that trend line forward, we're about 15% below where that trend line would take us. We've had the boom and bust cycle, but freight brokerage MC, if you're talking about growth over time, we're about 15% below that trend right now.
And I wanted to get some final thoughts as well. You talked about CarrierSource. This is fascinating. They had recently announced their new double broker list, and so I think that's some excellent timing, given the fact that carrier the impacts of fraud. So tell us about your experience now. So you're doing sales with CarrierSource, right?
I am. So I'm doing the shipper intent data. So the map that we saw, all the shippers doing searches. We have about 12,000 unique shippers on the website each month, conducting anywhere from say 25 to up to 50,000 searches for carriers and capacity. And what we do is we can bundle that in and send that as real-time signals to our clients, telling them where and when their client base, their prospects, their existing customers are searching for capacity. And as you know, Thomas, there's no better thing in sales than being at the right place at the right time. It just increases your odds, and that's what we provide.
Well, you guys, but talk about great timing though. You nailed it on the head because now there's so much focus on closing those barriers, fighting fraud, fixing these issues of systemic double brokering, and so being able to have a tool where you can look folks up and make sure that they're legit,
Yeah.
it's got to be huge. We appreciate you hopping on the show as well, Kevin. Folks want to learn more about not only CarrierSource but Brush Pass Research. What is the best way to get more information?
Best way to get more information is look me up on LinkedIn, Kevin Hill. I'm always out and posting things, or you can email me directly at kevin@brushpassresearch.com and learn more about the data that we provide.
Perfect, Kevin. Always great getting to catch up. We'll definitely see you again soon. Hopefully, you make it over to F3 this year. You know, it's in October. Who knows? Make it to link up.
I think I might be able to. I see Baudendistel is up next, so tell him hi for me.
We'll send the regards. Thanks so much, Kevin. We'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, Thomas.
Speaking of Mike Baudendistel, we're going to go roll into our next guest now. There's been a lot of talk about the rails, especially in terms of consolidation with the recent announcement of mergers, waiting approval, of course, through the STB and everything else. But I wanted to bring one of our experts on to dive into it more because for folks who don't know, a lot of trucking also does stuff with rails. If you think of like companies like JB Hunt, like half of their volume is intermodal. And so there's going to be a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of stuff to talk about. So let's welcome on Mike Baudendistel. He's the head of intermodal solutions at Sonar. Mike, absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for hopping on the show today.
Yeah, no problem. And you're right. There's a lot to talk about in the rail industry right now and the intermodal industry.
Kevin also said hi, by the way. So if you want to say hi back, I still think we have him in LTA too.
Yeah, say hi for me. I'm not sure how I feel about those glasses, though.
Boom. We can do it on the three-way. Wait for it. Bam. Look at that. We at What the Truck are making dreams happen.
Good familiar face there.
All right, let's dive in here. Let's look at some news. Yeah, no, what you got, Kevin? We'll throw you on too. I love live shows. Let's do it. We're going to hold him against his will. You can't leave, Kevin. You're not going anywhere. Yeah. Let's we'll kick Kevin off here. Thank you so much, of course, Kevin. We're gonna hop on the mic here. I was trying to do something fun. With SiriusXM, they usually just hang up on people. So with our setup here, it's super fun. But shout out for Kevin for being such a good sport while I'm messing around on air. So we had recent news, of course. I'm gonna dive into some stuff. I'm gonna ask Mike his thoughts. The first one here, if you've been keeping up the past week, Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern have reached an $85 billion merger deal. Follow-on reporting is talking about the concerns over dismal service, and it also puts the intermodal giants on the wrong side of the map. So we have about a three-way combination of stuff which could be going down. And so, Mike, you have been an analyst. You were at Stifel. You talked about rails. You reported on it. When we're putting on that kind of hat, what are your thoughts? Because it does feel like it's like the Catalina wine mixer of rail deals.
Yeah, so I guess my thought is if one deal is approved, we're going to see a second deal approved. So it's likely that BNSF will acquire CSX because you just have too much of a competitive advantage, the players that combine for the transcontinental network. So I think you'll see that, assuming that it's approved. And then I also think there's a lot of implications for those domestic intermodal companies, like you just mentioned, JB Hunt, where they use BNSF exclusively in the West and then primarily use Norfolk Southern on the East. I mean, you have to sort of figure there's going to be a realignment in which railroads they use. I mean, similar situation for some of the other players. I mean, the only there's the one of the articles, but similar situation where you have some of the domestic intermodal companies are going to change the railroads that they use on one side of the Mississippi or another. So I think you'll see some pretty significant changes there. We did have that one article up on the site, puts the railroads on the wrong side of the map. And then I think you'll also see a change with the UMAX fleet, which is fleet of containers owned by the railroads that goes on Union Pacific and CSX. And so I think there's just going to be a lot of changes to domestic intermodal. I think there's a lot that the audience of this show largely truckers are going to have to think through. I think intermodal is going to be a lot more competitive in some of the lanes where it really does not compete in right now, because they're on the OD pairs on opposite sides of the Mississippi River. It requires an interchange, and that requires a lot of inefficiencies, and the railroads to figure out how to revenue share. But I would expect intermodal to be a stronger offering for a lot of lanes where currently you would have to interchange. So big implications if you're a trucking company listening to this, and let's say you move truckloads from Dallas to Columbus because there's no intermodal service now. Well, there's going to be an intermodal service offering that could potentially be very competitive, assuming this acquisition comes to fruition.
And that was one of the things that blew my mind was the interchange aspect. I was wondering, back when I worked at a freight brokerage and other stuff, we'd put things on the rail. We just knew it took a while to get there, but it never was really talk about the nuts and bolts of it. And so I talked with Stuart last week. He said that, let's say we start in LA and we want to get to New York. Well, it's got to get handed off to another railroad. They do the swapsies. They have to figure out how much to charge, who gets a cut, and then you got to figure out the billing process. And so is that one of the big concerns that you did bring up, is that now with the potential for a full coast to coast, we don't have to go up to like Chicago to play handoff. Instead, we can just go all the way in or make tinier stops. So it could speed up rail, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases they might avoid Chicago, and other places they might still go through Chicago. And instead, what they can avoid is what's called a rubber tire interchange, where they basically take the containers off the railroad, they move them across town to another railroad's terminal, put them back on the railroads. That really takes a lot of time. That could take 1 to 2 days, sort of given how much volume is on an intermodal train. And then, like you said, there's a revenue share agreement, and all those things is part of what makes intermodal less competitive for freight that's time sensitive. I mean, you sort of think of good intermodal service as truckload plus a day, maybe truckload plus 2 days, depending on the lane. But if you can take 1 to 2 days off of an intermodal move, all of a sudden you have something that's essentially truckload-like service. In some cases, it might even be better than truckload service, considering that the hours of service rules, I don't think are as onerous on the railroad. You have things like crew changes. So I think you could have a situation where your LA to New York example, you bring it on Union Pacific, there's a crew change, you keep the very same locomotives, you keep the train consist intact, you move it all the way to New York, and you can get it there faster than you could on the highway, because highway carriers have to comply with all these more restrictive hours of service rules, and so you sort of think about that could reduce the opportunities for truckers in those lanes. It might also give an incentive to move cargo through the West Coast ports, because those are much faster from China and the eastern countries there than an all water route through the Panama Canal. So I think you could see that the West Coast ports gain market share as a result of this also.
And the thoughts about service here, we've got it on our little ticker on the side here, the potential for service. Some of the shippers have come out against the potential merger, fearing that for a couple of them, I think like chemicals and other ones that are on the rails exclusively, I guess there are growing concerns that they may be taken advantage of. Talk about that aspect in relation to service. I know we've had previous conversations about rail service issues tied into the pandemic and then train links and the whole thing, but talk about this extra dimension. Are you bullish or bearish in terms of service levels, given that we may finally have a transcontinental railroad if this all goes down?
I think it depends what sector you're talking about. I think, if you're talking about something like a chemical shipper, I mean, the chemical shippers are at a disadvantage when it comes to transportation for the most part, because in many cases they're captive to the railroad, and oftentimes they can be captive to one railroad, like you saw the lawsuit that DuPont had sort of years ago. I guess it was a rate case of the STB that they ended up winning against CSX. And so some of these big bulk shippers that really have no other option. So those are things like coal, bulk chemicals, grain. I think that you do have the potential for rail service, failures. Maybe it prevents another option, when it does get interchanged in the middle of the country. So the shippers are very concerned about this. Some of those shipper groups have come out against the acquisition, saying that, we've seen this before in the past when there have been acquisitions that that the service has melted down. Certainly, we saw service melt down for a number of reasons during the pandemic. So shippers right to have those concerns. I think with intermodal, you have a different incentive structure, essentially, because its truckload is always a competitive threat, even on a longer length of haul. So I think the service levels potentially for intermodal could be much better. I think for rail carload could potentially go kind of either way.
And let's talk about the second order effects. One of the fascinating ones is that CSX, not to be outdone, CSX is apparently, according to Bloomberg, has engaged Goldman Sachs to advise about its potential merger options. Analysts believe that with this Union Pacific Norfolk Southern combination, it may put pressure on BNSF Railway and CSX to respond either through a merger or some other options. That's very fascinating. Is looking as from you put on your analyst hat, is it really something as simple as, well, they're merging, I guess I need to merge, or is there some kind of precedent where maybe this is 10 years in the making and now the conditions are right where we're suddenly seeing the potential blockbuster merge and consolidation of our class one railroads?
Yeah, certainly timing is everything. I mean, the acquisition has to be approved by the Surface Transportation Board, and the current composition of the board is going to be more receptive to acquisition situation than the previous iteration of the board would have been. I believe, like the last iteration of the board, chairman was Marty Oberman, it was really tough on the railroads. I mean, much tougher on the railroads than anyone else I had seen on Surface Transportation Board. So I think it would have been hard for him to find that this does enhance competition, which is one of the rules, and that it is in the public's best interest, those are really the two criteria for this. Now, with the current Surface Transportation Board, it looks like the chairman's maybe going to be a person who's more receptive to the merger, and then there's going to be a fifth member added who was presidentially appointed by Donald Trump. Now, we don't know how the president feels about this, if he's even given any thought to it, how he would come out on this. Potentially he's, in favor of it because he's pro-business, but we've also seen the president take a very strong stance in favor of organized labor when the whole ILA situation was taking place at the East Coast ports. And we've seen some of the big labor organizations come out against this Union Pacific Norfolk Southern acquisition, including the largest rail union, which is the Smart unions. Smart TD is the one that does the train and engine employees. Basically represents the conductors, which is the largest single group. They speak the UTU. So we've seen organized labor sort of come out against it. So there's a lot to still kind of take place here.
I was curious about the labor aspect. That's something you brought up that I hadn't considered. Are these laborers, I'm assuming these unions are across all the class ones, or is it kind of like we're trucking where maybe one company has the union, another one doesn't? Or is it one thing where if you think of the class one space, organized labor is pretty well penetrated with each individual group being represented?
Yeah, so it's really industry wide. I mean, the different crafts have different unions, and so like the locomotive engineers that drive the trains, the BLET, represents them. They've really yet to come out very forcefully against the acquisition. They said we're going to sort of wait for a little bit more detail, so taking a little bit more measured approach there. Whereas that biggest union, the Smart TD, I mean, they came out against it right away. I mean, they must have had a press release all teed up, ready to go as soon as it was announced. But yeah, different unions for different crafts, so different functions or crafts.
Yeah, and I feel like we're going to need an HBO special on this. If this all goes down, gets approved, STB, this could take a month-long process. But one of the fascinating things was the activist investor Ancora had said that CSX could be a merger target if its performance metrics continue to lag. You and I have had a few fun conversations, and I want to thank you for educating me on the rails, because there's another dynamic where if you've got investors, they'll take a stake in the railroad, and then, well, if I can get a merge, maybe I can get like a return, or if I'm not performing well, I'm going to kick out the CEO and get another one. Is that one of the dynamics too? Because I think you're right. It's the perfect storm. And if the regulatory environment is fertile, then I guess you try and see if you can get away with it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it seems like an operating ratio that's higher than the peer group is what attracts the activist investors, and that Ancora has been public about the fact that they, are looking at CSX. If CSX, lags behind in terms of operating ratio, they're probably going to pile in, try to change up management, try to make them more efficient. As part of, a lot of people would say the CSX current management team is a feature. I mean, it's led by Joe Henricks, who came from the automotive industry. So he was a customer of the railroads. I believe he was with Ford for most of his career, and GM interviewed him at one point for a FreightWaves TV show. And he was very focused on improving the service quality. And also the takeaway from my interview with him was that he's also very focused on having good employee relations, which the employee relations deteriorated heavily during COVID. I mean, really during COVID, a lot of them left. Like a lot of people left their jobs during COVID and they didn't come back. Whereas he was focused on improving the employee morale, which thus in turn should lead to improved service levels. And sometimes those type of things are sort of directly opposed to what the investors want. Investors want just a more streamlined railroad network. I mean, doing more with less, sort of, even if that means that the railroads haul less volume or lose share to truck, like they've done over the past several years, or occasionally have service meltdowns where the STB has to come in and intervene. So I think it's a little bit of disconnect of maybe shorter term thinking versus longer term thinking.
And I mean, that can have a very large impact on the trucking space. You alluded to it earlier about the impacts of intermodal. I wanted to get your thoughts as well. So, pulling up one of the articles talking about the merger could put the intermodal giants on the wrong side of the map. Let me get this out here. JB Hunt is the largest intermodal operator. They use BNSF Railway in the west and primarily Norfolk Southern in the east. We have Schneider and STD Logistics, who use Union Pacific and CSX. When this happens, and I'm kind of curious about this, if we have a combined railroad, I know in trucking it's hard to digest your food. Example, Knight Swift, US Express, they kind of operate under an umbrella, but each of them has their own thing. If this thing goes down, do you still make deals with the intermodal, or do two of them get left out in the cold, or is it like a divorce where you swap weekends with your intermodal carrier? Like, talk about some of that aspect. I'm very curious what this may mean for the truckload carriers who, for the past decade plus, or 2 decades, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, they have put their stakes into intermodal as an expansion, and now the rug may be pulled.
Yeah, I think they're going to swap partners, to use your analogy, with the exception of JB Hunt uses BNSF in the West exclusively. That's going to continue. They have that sort of evergreen contract. I don't think it's in either of their best interest to change that. But JB Hunt primarily uses Norfolk Southern in the East. I mean, not exclusively, but I would imagine that they start using CSX in the East. I mean, we do see some of the other intermodal carriers change which railroads they use from time to time. A number of years ago, Union Pacific went from, Hub Group went from using BNSF to using Union Pacific. I mean, that was a long time ago, 10, 12 years ago or something. But then more recently, you've seen domestic intermodal companies that had been using BNSF shift to Union Pacific. And that was because they felt like, well, they're kind of second-class citizens on BNSF, because for BNSF is all about serving JB Hunt, and that partnership is just so strong that any domestic intermodal company that's not JB Hunt is just not going to be treated the same as JB Hunt, maybe with the exception of a company that's in the parcel industry that is paying for a high level of service also. So I do think you'll see realignment there. I think that the domestic intermodal companies that use, BNSF will use CSX, and the ones that use UP will use Norfolk Southern. And I think the same thing will be true of the container fleets. I think there'll be sort of separate, container fleets. So I have to imagine that those things change, and a trucking company that is used to using a certain domestic intermodal company in a certain location, may have to get used to using the other one or go to a different location. So definitely think what the truck audience needs to pay attention to this.
Yeah, there may be something where you go to a railhead, you work with one company, they may have swapped locations. You're gonna have to sign up for another one to move the containers. It's definitely something you want to keep an eye on. So let's talk about. We got a little bit of time here. Looking ahead, one of the things is, of course, a timeline. We have the announcement of the intentions to merger, but the actual thing may be quite some time. What are your early thoughts right now? Is this something that may take a few months to watch, or what kind of timeline, if any, do you see at this moment?
Yeah, I think it'll take more than a few months. So right now, the next step is Union Pacific has to file a formal petition to acquire Norfolk Southern, and they have up to 6 months to do that. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 6 months, and then the Surface Transportation Board has, as much time as they need, but it's sort of the timeline they've given is about 18 months. So that sort of puts it. The total timeline is sometime in, let's say, the first half of 2027 to fully close. Surface Transportation Board has talked about wanting to do this, sort of faster than prior transactions, but we've seen prior transactions take a long time. The CP Kansas City Southern deal, I believe that took over 2 years to fully get approved and closed. So it could be a while before you just see the impact to transportation networks, but would expect that they're coming.
Perfect. Mike, thanks so much for hopping on with me, giving me a heads up here. It's always educational and informative. I swear one of these days I'm going to remember most of the rail stuff, but good grief, there's so much going on that I'm really thankful that you're able to hop on and explain it for us.
Yeah, no problem. Good seeing you, Thomas.
Good to see you as well. We got a little bit of housekeeping now coming up. We have, of course, our Freight Tech Awards, and then I have a special discount code. Let's kick up the Freight Tech 100 first. That's going to be super important. We want to make sure that everyone is aware. That's why I keep talking about it, that we have the Freight Tech 100 for this year, and it is nominations are open. So go in there, put in your nominations. You can nominate yourself, you can nominate your friend, you can nominate as many people as you want, as many times as you want. So don't feel like you only have to do one and done. An important thing is, of course, is that there is a pricing structure. So if you do want to nominate everyone, including your dog, unfortunately, it may cost you. But if you're philanthropic, it may work out. Key dates to remember. This is another important one. Right now, it's August the 8th. And so by the 17th, our standard entry ends. Our last chance begins on the 18th. And then nominations for the Freight Tech Awards close on September 1st. And so you have a little bit under, looks to be you got about 3 weeks to work with before nominations close. So make sure that you go there. It's under that. And then finally, we will announce the Freight Tech 100 winners on September 22nd. And then the Freight Tech 25, which is where we get a group of people and they go through the list of the 100, is a third party. So no shenanigans and no games, unfortunately. That will be announced at F3, the Future of Freight Festival, which I want to note as well. It is being held at an earlier date. If you want to know, you go to live.freightwaves.com, you pull it up. It is on October 21st and 22nd. So while you're at it, we have a What the Truck special discount code. That is right. It is in all caps, WTTF325. That is Whiskey Tango Tango Foxtrot 325. That gets you $900 off. We want to make sure that we promote it. We always encourage everybody to put in for these things. You'll get to see me and a bunch of other folks here at the F3 Future of Freight Festival, and that is, of course, October 21st and 22nd. If you come into town early, there is one more thing. Founder and CEO Craig Fuller had recently announced that the industry strikes back. A freight fraud hackathon is taking place on October the 20th. You can register for that as well. Things to expect, of course, are going to be free API access, collaborative teams. We have prizes, recognition, and networking opportunities. We're looking for developers and engineers, data scientists, analysts, professionals, anyone who wants to help join the fight against freight fraud. It is a one-day hackathon as we work before F3. So it's a good chance to check it out. So while you're in the neighborhood and you're already coming to F3, hey, sign up, register, check it out. Also want to encourage you to check out a lot of our communities as well. I, of course, write Loaded and Rolling that focuses on fleets and maintenance, as well as Truck Tech that focuses on truck technology. So a lot of great stuff as well. Thank you all so much. It's been a wonderful week. We have finally made it. Those of you listening on SiriusXM, hey, always a pleasure. We'll get to catch up with you all again soon. In the meantime, don't be a stranger. I'll catch you again on Monday.